Brockton's Celestial Forge by Lord Rustabout. Chapter 1, Introduction. It was hard enough being a college dropout in a city with a half-dead economy. In Brockton, most people were either ignoring the reality of the situation or had given up on hope completely. Realistically, the only growth industry was cape work, and if you weren't a cape, that meant tourism, the PRT, or henchmaning for the truly desperate. Most of the city would have given their right arm for superpowers. Too bad they didn't understand what you have to go through in order to trigger, or how the powers you get don't exactly match up with what you dreamed about. If I thought about the current level of what my power was capable of was all I would ever get, I would probably be pretty frustrated. Back when I was in college, everyone dreamed about being a tinker. When you were in an engineering program in the same city as Unsemester, it was really inevitable. When I finally got powers, they didn't exactly match what you'd expect from a tinkerer. Then again, from what I learned about, most tinkerers didn't exactly function on the level of what you'd expect from a tinkerer. Technically, I had only made one thing so far. It was a doozy, but still not exactly the stuff of heroes are made out of. I might have been able to leverage it into some obscure application, especially the secondary effects, but it would have been a challenge. Still not as bad as it could have been, or would have been. I had my mighty pseudo tinker powers for all week and had not accomplished much in that time. Mostly I had been focusing on sorting out the mess of my life that had resulted in my trigger event. I wouldn't exactly say bridges were burned, but there were some close relations that it would be awkward to deal with for a while. Triggers don't really fix anything. Well, they might if it's one of those ones that turn you into super strong to deal with being crushed by a car, but for anything that has a longer buildup, there's no amount of power that is actually going to fix the problems with either you or your life that led to the situation. Accepting that at least let me start to move on. I was riding the bus home after a grueling week of work. They say there are no jobs in Brockton Bay, but that's not exactly true. There are plenty of jobs as long as you're relatively young, clean, and willing to put up with abuse from the general public and don't need support of anyone else or have any serious obligations beyond basic survival. Which is how I was able to land a job as a part-time realtor worker in the rich side of the city. In a store where everyone other than the manager was part-time, since that you avoid all of those pesky benefits that would have to be paid. It was how I was able to afford the truly terrible apartment in not quite the worst area of the docks. I was currently living in the part of the city that had warned us against when I had first moved out of the dorms. It at least got me away from Captain Hill, and thanks to my powers, was just bearable. The apartment was about a 5-minute walk from the nearest bus stop, this neighborhood was somewhat, I think that's supposed to be which in, this neighborhood was a somewhat harrowing experience. The apartment was part of an oversized house that had been divided into 5 units, which was mine as a long, thin studio apartment. My theory was it had been assembled out of leftover space. The fact that it had the access from what must have been a converted fire escape only did more to convince me. It was clearly a case of we have this extra space. Can we get someone to pay for it? I know there are much worse places. I looked at what they offered in my price range downtown, and this was totally worth the half-hour bus commute. Plus, thanks to my power, it had one advantage. Once I got home and dumped my jacket and headed for the closet. This would probably wear thin eventually, but for now, after just a week of having my power, it was still a blast. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my key. It was the first thing I built if I could count as the person who built it. There were 2 kinds of things I could make with my powers. Things made out of normal materials and things like this. I couldn't recreate the key if my life depended on it, but that doesn't matter because it will always exist. I've essentially made it a universal constant that I will always have this key. Destroyed, lost, or just separated, and it will turn up in a few minutes. This effect and what it could accomplish was enough that if I didn't know the full scope of my powers, I would probably have assumed that this key and what it could do was everything. Then it would probably be up to the PRT to let them try and figure out how to brand me as a door-based superhero. I slid the key into the closet door and turned it. Rather than opening to a small and musty collection of shirts and winter coats, the door revealed a blank white cube of exactly 5 meters on each side. Safe and mobile access to an extra-dimensional space wasn't a terrible power and could probably have any number of applications. I mean, if I wanted to go villain, it would have let me clean out entire stores without anything weighing me down. I was putting it to a much more mundane application. Alright, I'm gonna have to cut it off there because I have to go, and it's been 6 minutes. But I will continue reading the story later. Thank you for listening, if you've even been listening.